The first sign that something was wrong with my marriage didn't come with shouting or accusations. It arrived quietly, almost politely, like a whisper in a crowded room that only I seemed to hear. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind of evening where the sky turns a dull shade of gray before surrendering to darkness far too early. I had just returned home from work, exhausted after spending the entire day managing a crisis at the logistics company where I had worked for nearly 12 years. Our house stood on a quiet suburban street outside Denver. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was the kind of home people worked their entire 20s and 30s to afford. 2 floors, a small front yard, and a backyard where my wife, Laura, had once insisted on planting roses. Those roses were now dying. I noticed that as I stepped onto the porch. Brown leaves clung weakly to thin stems, and the soil looked dry. Laura used to care for them every morning. Now they looked forgotten. Inside the house, the lights were on, but the silence felt heavy. Normally, Laura would greet me with a quick smile or at least a casual, "Hey, you're home." Instead, I found her sitting at the kitchen island, staring down at her phone. She didn't notice me at first. Her face had that soft expression people get when they're reading something that makes them happy. A small smile, the kind of smile she used to give me. When she finally looked up, she startled slightly, quickly locking her phone and flipping it over. "Oh," she said, "you're home early." "Early?" I glanced at the wall clock. It was nearly 7 p.m. "Same time as always," I replied. She forced a small laugh and stood up, walking toward the sink. "How was work?" Her tone sounded normal, but something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just distant. "Busy," I said. "Where's dinner?" "I've ordered takeout." Laura used to love cooking. She had once told me that feeding someone you love was one of the purest ways to show affection. Now there were no pots on the stove, no smell of garlic or onions filling the kitchen, just a faint scent of cold takeout containers sitting on the counter. It was a small thing, but small things are often where cracks begin. Laura and I had been married for 9 years. We met when we were both 27 at a friend's birthday party. She had been standing near the balcony railing, laughing at something someone said. That laugh was what caught my attention first. It was genuine, unfiltered. I spent the rest of the night trying to find excuses to talk to her. 3 years later, we got married. At the time, I believed I had found the person I would grow old with. Looking back now, I wonder if she ever felt the same way. Over the next few weeks, little things started changing. Laura began spending more time on her phone. She started taking it everywhere. Bathroom, laundry room, even to the backyard when she watered the plants, though she rarely did that anymore. Whenever a message arrived, her phone lit up and she would check it almost instantly. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she quickly locked the screen when I entered the room. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Paranoia is a dangerous habit in marriage. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. One Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Laura was still asleep beside me. Her phone lay on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification. I didn't mean to look, but I did. The message preview showed only a few words. "Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach tightened. The message disappeared before I could read more. Laura shifted in her sleep and turned over. I stared at the ceiling, my heart beating harder than it should have. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. That's the thing about betrayal. Before you accept it, your mind creates 100 excuses to avoid the truth. The next few days were unbearable. I watched Laura carefully. Every gesture, every expression, every time she checked her phone. She seemed happier, but not with me. And that realization hurt more than anything else. The second crack appeared a week later. It was late at night, around 11:30 p.m. I was sitting in the living room finishing some emails when Laura walked downstairs dressed differently than usual. Black jeans, a light jacket, makeup. "Going somewhere?" I asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Just meeting Sarah." Sarah was her best friend, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. At midnight, I asked. "She's having a rough week." That answer sounded reasonable. Still, the uneasy feeling in my chest refused to go away. Okay, I said slowly. Laura grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she leaned down and kissed my cheek. It felt unfamiliar, like a habit rather than affection. Then she was gone. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the door. Finally, I picked up my phone and called Sarah. She answered after 2 rings. Hey! Her voice sounded cheerful. Hey, I said carefully. Laura said you weren't doing well. Just wanted to check in. There was a pause, a long pause. What do you mean? My chest felt suddenly hollow. She said she was meeting you tonight. Another silence. Then Sarah said the words that would start unraveling my entire life. I'm not with Laura. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room watching the clock as the hours passed. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Laura finally returned around 2:40 in the morning. She looked surprised to see me awake. You're still up? Yeah. She placed her purse on the table and avoided eye contact. How was Sarah? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Better, she said finally. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a thread snapping under too much tension. Because I knew, and deep down she knew that I knew, but the truth was still hidden. And what I would discover next would destroy far more than just my marriage. It would expose a secret Laura had been hiding for months, a secret relationship that had been growing right under my nose. And once I started digging, I realized I had no idea who my wife really was. The next morning felt unreal, like waking up inside someone else's life. I barely slept after Laura came home at 2:40 a.m. I stayed on the couch pretending to scroll through my phone while my mind replayed the same moment again and again. Sarah's confused voice on the phone saying, I'm not with Laura. That single sentence had quietly detonated inside my head. When Laura came downstairs around 8 in the morning, sunlight was already spilling through the kitchen windows, lighting the wooden floor in warm strips of gold. She looked normal, completely normal. Her hair tied back, wearing one of my oversized sweaters like she often did on weekends. She poured herself coffee and glanced at me. You're up early, she said casually. Her tone was calm, steady, practiced. I watched her carefully, studying her face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. But if she felt either, she hid it well. Couldn't sleep, I said. She nodded and sipped her coffee. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched across the kitchen like an invisible wall between us. Finally, she broke it. I'm going to run some errands today, she said. Groceries, maybe stop by the mall. Okay, I replied. I didn't ask any questions. Not because I believed her, but because I had already decided something. I was going to find out the truth. That decision terrified me more than I expected. Because once you start looking for the truth in a marriage, you risk discovering things you can never unsee. Still, I couldn't ignore what I already knew. Laura had lied, and lies usually hide something bigger behind them. After she left the house around 10, I waited another 15 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out as well. I didn't have a clear plan, only a restless feeling in my chest pushing me forward. The October air outside felt crisp and cold, the kind that carried the scent of dry leaves and distant fireplaces. As I drove through the quiet suburban streets, I tried to think logically. Maybe Laura really was shopping. Maybe there was an explanation. But deep down, a darker possibility had already taken root in my mind. I decided to start with Sarah. Her apartment sat about 20 minutes away in a small complex near downtown Denver. I had been there many times before: birthday parties, casual dinners, late-night conversations. Sarah opened the door wearing sweatpants and an old university hoodie. Her blonde hair was messy, like she had just woken up. Hey, she said, surprised to see me. Everything okay? I forced a small smile. Can I come in? She stepped aside immediately. Of course. Her living room smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla candles. The TV was playing quietly in the background, some random morning talk show no one was actually watching. Sarah sat on the couch and looked at me curiously. You look stressed. I hesitated before speaking. Did Laura tell you she was meeting you last night? Sarah frowned. No. Why? I rubbed my hands together slowly. Because she told me she was. The confusion on Sarah's face looked genuine. Wait, what? She said she was going to see you because you were having a rough week. Sarah leaned back against the couch, shaking her head. I haven't seen Laura in like 2 weeks. The words felt heavy in the air. I nodded slowly, as if hearing confirmation of something I already suspected. Sarah studied my expression carefully. Mark, what's going on? I sighed, staring down at the floor. I think Laura might be seeing someone. The sentence felt like broken glass leaving my mouth. Sarah didn't speak immediately. Instead, she leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. Why do you think that? I told her everything. The late-night messages, the constant phone use, the lie about meeting Sarah. As I spoke, Sarah's expression slowly changed from confusion to concern. Have you asked her about it? She finally asked. No, I said quietly. Why not? Because I was afraid of the answer. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I just shook my head. I want proof first. Sarah exhaled slowly. Mark, if she really is cheating, you need to prepare yourself for what that means. Her words felt heavy with reality. Because cheating doesn't just damage trust. It rewrites every memory you thought was real. When I left Sarah's apartment, the sky had turned darker, thick clouds rolling across the horizon like an approaching storm. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. A part of me wanted to drive home and pretend none of this existed. But another part, the stronger part, needed answers. Over the next few days, I started noticing more things, little details that suddenly felt suspicious. Laura began going to gym almost every evening, except she never came home sweaty. Her phone was always face down. She started guarding it like it contained state secrets. And then one night, something happened that confirmed my worst fears. Laura fell asleep on the couch while watching Netflix. Her phone rested loosely in her hand. The screen lit up with a notification. My heart started pounding immediately. For a long moment, I just stared at the phone. Then slowly, carefully, I picked it up. The message was from a contact saved only as D. The preview showed just one sentence. I miss you already. My chest tightened. Hand shaking slightly, I unlocked the phone. Laura's passcode hadn't changed. It was still the same number she had used for years. Our wedding anniversary. For a moment, that realization hurt more than the message itself, because it meant she hadn't even bothered hiding things properly. Or maybe she never expected me to look. I opened the conversation, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Weeks of messages. Hundreds of them. Flirting. Inside jokes. Photos. Plans to meet. One message stood out among the rest. Last night at the hotel was perfect. My vision blurred slightly as I stared at the screen. Hotel. So it wasn't just emotional. It was physical. The realization felt like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. I scrolled further down. Another message from Laura read, Mark has no idea. That sentence shattered something inside me completely, because it wasn't just betrayal. It was deception, mockery. Footsteps shifted on the couch beside me. I quickly locked the phone and placed it back in Laura's hand. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. I sat there quietly, my mind racing faster than it ever had before. Now I knew Laura was cheating, but I still didn't know who D was. And for some reason, that part bothered me the most, because whoever he was, he had slowly taken my place in my wife's life. The next day, I took a half day off work, not because I was sick, but because I had decided to follow Laura. I hated the idea of spying on my own wife, but the marriage I thought I had was already crumbling, and I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. At around 6 p.m., Laura left the house. Jim, she said casually. I waited 10 minutes before getting into my car. Keeping a safe distance, I followed her through the evening traffic. She didn't go to the gym. Instead, she drove downtown. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as she turned into the parking lot of a modern glass office building. She parked, then stepped out of the car. A few seconds later, another man approached her. Tall, dark hair, confident posture. And the moment he reached her, Laura smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. Then she kissed him, right there in the parking lot, like their relationship was completely normal, like I didn't exist. I sat in my car frozen, watching the scene unfold. My chest felt hollow. Not angry. Not yet. Just empty. Because in that moment, every lie, every late night, every suspicious message finally aligned into a single painful truth. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was in love with someone else. And I had just watched it happen with my own eyes. But what I didn't realize yet was that the man Laura kissed that night was someone who would make this betrayal far worse than I ever imagined. Because he wasn't just a stranger. He was someone connected to my life in a way that would soon turn this heartbreak into something much darker. That night, after watching Laura kiss another man in the dimly lit parking lot of that downtown office building, something inside me changed in a way I couldn't fully explain. The world around me felt strangely quiet, as if every sound had been muted. Cars moved through the street behind me, their headlights sweeping across the pavement. But I barely noticed them. All I could see was Laura standing there with him, laughing softly, her hand resting on his chest like it belonged there. That simple gesture felt more painful than the kiss itself, because it carried familiarity, comfort, the kind of ease that only grows between people who have spent time together, people who have shared moments that were never meant to exist. I remained in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned pale. For a few seconds, my mind begged me to start the engine and drive away, to pretend I hadn't seen what I just saw. But my body refused to move. Instead, I watched as the man leaned down and said something that made Laura smile again, that same warm smile she used to give me when we were first married. Then the two of them walked toward the glass doors of the building together. He placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered, guiding her inside with quiet confidence. That small detail burned itself into my memory, because it used to be my place. I sat there for nearly 10 minutes after they disappeared inside. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spinning between anger, disbelief, and a heavy sadness that settled deep in my stomach. Eventually, I forced myself to breathe slowly and start thinking logically. Seeing them together confirmed what I already suspected. Laura was having an affair, but something else bothered me even more than the betrayal itself. The man looked familiar, not completely familiar, but familiar enough to trigger a strange sense of recognition in the back of my mind. I had seen him somewhere before. I just couldn't remember where. That feeling followed me all the way home. When I arrived, the house felt colder than usual. The lights were off, and the silence seemed thicker than ever. I sat in the kitchen for a while staring at the dying roses outside the window, trying to organize my thoughts. For years, Laura and I had built a life inside these walls. We painted the living room together. We argued over which couch to buy. We hosted friends for dinners and holiday gatherings. Now the house felt like a stage set from a life that no longer existed. Around 11 p.m., Laura finally came home. I heard the front door open quietly, followed by the soft sound of her heels tapping across the wooden floor. She walked into the kitchen and stopped when she saw me sitting at the table. "Oh," she said with mild surprise. "You're still up?" Her voice sounded normal, calm, casual. I looked at her carefully. Her hair was slightly messy, and she had reapplied her lipstick recently. She carried the faint scent of a man's cologne mixed with her perfume. "Long workout?" I asked. She paused for just a moment. "Yeah," she said. "The gym was packed tonight." I nodded slowly. Another lie. She moved toward the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of water, completely unaware that I had watched her kiss another man only hours earlier. That thought created a strange distance between us, as if we were two strangers performing roles in the same scene. "Good night," she said after finishing the water. Then she walked upstairs. I stayed at the table long after she disappeared, because now I wasn't just dealing with suspicion anymore. I had proof, but proof alone wasn't enough. I needed to know who he was. The next morning, I began searching. At first, I checked Laura's phone again while she was in the shower. The conversation with the contact, labeled D, had grown even longer overnight. There were messages about missing each other, jokes about sneaking around, and plans for meeting again later that week. One particular message caught my attention. Laura had written, I can't believe how close this is to Mark's office. The risk makes it exciting. My stomach twisted when I read that. Not only was she cheating, she was doing it practically within reach of my workplace. That detail told me something important. This man probably worked nearby, possibly even in the same business district. That realization gave me a direction to investigate. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to Laura's schedule. I noticed a pattern quickly forming. She usually left the house around 6 in the evening on the days she claimed to be going to the gym. Instead, she drove downtown, the same direction I followed her before. By Thursday evening, I decided to follow her again. The sky was darkening as she pulled out of the driveway, her car disappearing around the corner of our quiet suburban street. I waited a few minutes before starting my own car and heading after her, keeping several vehicles between us so she wouldn't notice. Traffic moved slowly as we entered the city. Neon signs flickered on as businesses prepared for the night crowd, and the sidewalks filled with people leaving offices or heading to restaurants. Laura turned into the same parking lot as before. This time, I parked farther away and watched carefully. The man arrived a few minutes later in a silver sedan. When he stepped out of the car and walked under one of the bright parking lights, I finally saw his face clearly, and in that moment, the strange feeling of recognition slammed into me like a punch to the chest. I knew him, not as a close friend, but well enough to recognize him instantly. His name was Daniel Carter. He worked for the same logistics company as me, not in my department, but in the corporate strategy division on the top floor of our office building. I had spoken to him a handful of times during company meetings. We had even shaken hands once at a holiday party. The realization made my entire body go cold. This wasn't just some random man Laura met at a bar or through friends. This was someone connected directly to my professional life. Someone who knew my name. Someone who knew I was married to her. Yet he still stood there in that parking lot, smiling at my wife as if I didn't exist. When Laura stepped out of her car, Daniel walked over to greet her. They embraced immediately, holding each other longer than necessary. Then he whispered something into her ear that made her laugh softly before they kissed again. I watched everything from the shadows of my car. Every second felt heavier than the last, because now the betrayal had a face. And that face belonged to a man who knew exactly who I was. The worst part wasn't the anger. It was the humiliation. The idea that while I sat in meetings discussing quarterly budgets, this man was secretly sleeping with my wife. That thought kept repeating in my head like a broken record. But as painful as the truth was, it also gave me something powerful. Clarity. Now I knew who he was. And that meant I could learn more about him. I could understand how this affair started, how long it had been going on, and most importantly, how to make sure the truth eventually came out. Because one thing had become painfully clear during those long nights of quiet observation. My marriage was already broken. Laura had chosen someone else. But the story wasn't over yet. Not even close. Because Daniel Carter had just stepped into a situation far more complicated than he realized. And soon, both of them would discover that secrets rarely stay hidden forever. After discovering that the man Laura was seeing was Daniel Carter, someone who worked in the same company as me, everything about the situation suddenly felt heavier. Betrayal is painful enough when it comes from a stranger, but when the person involved is someone connected to your daily life, someone whose name appears in work emails and meetings, the humiliation cuts deeper. For 2 days after that discovery, I barely spoke to anyone at the office. I kept my head down, finishing tasks mechanically while my mind constantly replayed the image of Laura and Daniel standing in that parking lot together. Every time I heard Daniel's name mentioned in the office hallway, my stomach tightened. The strange thing was that Daniel acted completely normal at work. I saw him once in the elevator the next morning. He stepped inside holding a coffee cup, nodded politely when he recognized me, and said, "Morning, Mark." His voice was calm, casual, exactly the same as it had always been. For a moment, I wondered if he truly believed I had no idea what was happening. Maybe he assumed Laura had hidden everything perfectly. Maybe he believed he was just another invisible shadow in my life. But standing in that elevator, watching the numbers climb floor by floor, I realized something important. Daniel wasn't nervous. He wasn't acting guilty. That meant one of two things. Either he had absolutely no conscience, or he believed the situation was under complete control. That realization sparked a different kind of energy inside me. For weeks I'd been reacting emotionally, drowning in suspicion and heartbreak. But now something colder began replacing those feelings. A quiet determination. I stopped thinking about confronting Laura immediately. Instead, I started observing. I began collecting information the same way someone slowly pieces together a puzzle. I paid attention to Daniel's work schedule, the meetings he attended, the days he stayed late at the office. I noticed that on the evenings Laura claimed to be at the gym, Daniel often left work earlier than usual. It didn't take long to connect a pattern, but the deeper I looked, the more complicated the situation seemed. One afternoon, while reviewing company documents in the conference room, I noticed Daniel's name listed on a new project proposal. It was a high-level strategy plan involving several major clients. The project required frequent meetings outside the office, travel opportunities, and flexible hours. Suddenly, Laura's unpredictable schedule began to make sense. If Daniel was involved in off-site meetings, it would give him the perfect excuse to disappear during work hours. That realization brought another painful thought with it. Laura must have known about my company connections through Daniel. She probably knew when I was busy, when I had meetings, when I wouldn't be home early. The idea that she could be using that knowledge to plan her time with another man made my chest tighten with anger. That evening when I returned home, Laura was sitting on the couch watching television. The glow from the screen illuminated her face in soft blue light. She looked relaxed, almost peaceful, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "You're home late," she said casually when I entered. "Work was busy," I replied. That part wasn't a lie. But the real reason I stayed late was because I had been reviewing Daniel's schedule and emails through the internal company system. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, trying to keep my breathing steady. For a moment, I considered confronting her right there. I imagined asking her directly about Daniel, watching her reaction, forcing the truth into the open. But something stopped me. Not fear. Something smarter. If I confronted her now, she would deny everything or simply become more careful. The truth might disappear before I fully understood it. So instead, I continued playing the same quiet role I had been playing for weeks. The husband who didn't know. Over the next several days, I gathered more pieces of information. Some of them came from Laura's phone messages when she left it unattended for brief moments. Others came from casual conversations at work, where colleagues unknowingly revealed details about Daniel's schedule. Then one night, I discovered something that made the entire situation far worse than I expected. It happened on a Wednesday evening, when Laura left her laptop open on the dining table. She had gone upstairs to take a shower, and the screen displayed an email notification. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the subject line caught my attention immediately. It read, "Flight confirmation, Seattle." My heart started beating faster. Laura hadn't mentioned any travel plans. Slowly, I sat down at the table and opened the email. The message confirmed a weekend flight, departing Friday evening. 2 tickets had been purchased together. One ticket was under Laura's name. The other was under Daniel Carter. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, unable to move. Seattle, a weekend trip. My wife and the man she was secretly seeing were planning to leave the city together. The realization felt like another betrayal layered on top of the others. It wasn't just a series of secret meetings anymore. They were building something bigger, something serious. And suddenly a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if Laura wasn't just having an affair? What if she was planning to leave me completely? That possibility changed everything. Because if she was preparing to walk away from our marriage, it meant she had already made her decision long ago. All the late nights, the secret messages, the lies about the gym, they weren't temporary mistakes. They were steps toward a different life. A life without me. That night, I barely slept again. I lay awake beside Laura, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing while my mind raced through dozens of possibilities. Should I confront her before the trip? Should I expose Daniel at work? Should I gather more evidence? Every option felt complicated. But by morning, I had made a decision. If Laura and Daniel believed they could disappear for a romantic weekend without consequences, they were about to be very wrong. because I wasn't going to stop them. In fact, I was going to let them go. Sometimes the truth reveals itself best when people believe no one is watching. And when Laura boarded that flight to Seattle with Daniel, she would think her secret was still safe. What she didn't realize was that by the time she returned, the quiet life she had carefully built on lies would already be collapsing around her. The morning Laura left for Seattle began like any other ordinary Friday, but to me it felt like the final scene of a long performance that had been quietly unfolding for months. The sky outside our bedroom window was pale and overcast, the kind of gray morning that made everything look dull and distant. Laura moved around the room packing her suitcase while soft music played from her phone. She seemed calm, even slightly excited, like someone looking forward to a short vacation. Watching her move between the closet and the bed, carefully folding clothes and placing them into the suitcase, felt surreal. Only a few days earlier I had discovered the email confirming her flight with Daniel, yet she continued behaving as if nothing unusual was happening. "I might be gone until Sunday night," she said casually while zipping up the suitcase. "Sarah invited me to visit her cousin in Seattle. I figured it would be a nice change of scenery." Her voice sounded natural, almost cheerful. Another lie. By that point, I had heard so many lies that they had started to lose their emotional impact. Instead of reacting with anger, I simply watched her quietly, noticing the small details I once would have ignored. The way she avoided eye contact when explaining the trip, the slightly rehearsed tone in her voice, the way she quickly changed the subject afterward. "Sounds fun," I said calmly. She looked relieved by my simple response. "Yeah, it should be," she replied. If she suspected that I knew anything, she hid it well. But the strange thing was that I no longer felt the desperate urge to confront her immediately. The past few weeks had changed something inside me. Instead of reacting emotionally, I had begun thinking strategically. I had already contacted a lawyer 2 days earlier, explaining the situation in careful detail. The lawyer advised me gather documentation, protect my finances, and avoid confrontation until I had secured everything legally. So while Laura finished packing, I already knew that our marriage was reaching its final chapter. She left for the airport around 3 in the afternoon. I watched from the front window as she placed her suitcase in the trunk of her car and drove away from the house. The street outside was quiet, the autumn trees swaying slightly in the cold wind. For a moment, I felt a wave of sadness remembering the first day Laura and I moved into this house together. Back then, we had stood on the porch laughing about how empty the rooms looked before we filled them with furniture and memories. Now those memories felt distant, like scenes from someone else's life. After she left, I began preparing for what would happen next. I spent the evening organizing documents, printing copies of financial records, and saving screenshots of the messages between Laura and Daniel that I had quietly collected over the past week. The evidence painted a clear picture of their relationship. Hotel bookings, affectionate messages, travel plans, and conversations that confirmed the affair had been going on for nearly 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of deception hidden behind casual smiles and ordinary conversations. The realization still hurt, but by that point the pain had transformed into something quieter and more controlled. By Saturday morning, I had already met with my lawyer in person. We reviewed everything carefully and finalized the first steps for filing divorce papers. The lawyer assured me that because we had no children and most of our assets were documented clearly, the legal process would be relatively straightforward. Hearing those words felt strange. The marriage that once meant everything to me was now being summarized in legal terms and paperwork. Still, it needed to happen. That afternoon, something unexpected occurred. While checking social media out of pure habit, I noticed a new photo posted by Daniel. It showed the Seattle skyline at sunset, the orange light reflecting off the water. The caption simply read, "Perfect weekend getaway." Laura wasn't visible in the photo, but I knew exactly where she was, standing beside him. Seeing that post confirmed something important. Daniel wasn't even trying to hide the trip. That meant he either believed I would never find out, or he simply didn't care. Either way, it told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he was. Sunday evening finally arrived, and with it came Laura's return flight. I was sitting in the living room when the front door opened around 9 at night. She walked inside carrying her suitcase, looking slightly tired but otherwise relaxed. "Hey," she said with a small smile. "I'm back." I nodded calmly. "How was Seattle?" "Good," she replied. "Sarah's cousin showed us around the city. It was nice." Another lie delivered effortlessly. But this time, I didn't pretend to believe it. Instead, I reached over to the coffee table and picked up a folder. Inside were the printed messages, the flight confirmation email, and the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. Laura noticed the folder immediately. "What's that?" she asked. I stood up slowly and handed it to her. "Something you should read." She looked confused at first, but as she opened the folder and saw the first printed message between her and Daniel, the color drained from her face. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. For several seconds, the room was completely silent. Finally, she looked up at me. "Mark, I can explain." Her voice was shaky now, but hearing those words no longer affected me the way they once might have. "There's nothing to explain," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with panic. "This isn't what it looks like." I couldn't help but let out a small, tired laugh. "It's exactly what it looks like." She tried to speak again, but the words seemed to disappear in her throat. I continued calmly. "You've been seeing Daniel for 6 months. You lied about the gym. You lied about Sarah. And you just spent the weekend in Seattle with him." Tears began forming in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. But that sentence felt empty, because affairs don't just happen. They are built through choices made again and again. I placed the divorce papers on the table in front of her. "I already spoke to a lawyer," I said. "All you need to do is sign." Laura stared at the papers as if they were something unreal. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she slowly sat down on the couch, covering her face with her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said quietly. Those words might have meant something months ago, but now they felt like echoes from a story that had already ended. The truth was simple. The marriage we once shared had already been destroyed long before that moment. The lies, the secrecy, and the choices she made had slowly erased the trust that once held everything together. As I stood there watching her cry, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a quiet sense of closure. Because sometimes the hardest part of betrayal isn't the moment you discover the truth. It's the long process of accepting that the person you loved is no longer the person standing in front of you. That night, Laura signed the papers. And with the simple stroke of a pen, the life we built together finally came to an end. But as painful as the experience had been, it also taught me something important. Sometimes the collapse of a relationship isn't just an ending. It's the moment when you finally stop living inside someone else's lies and begin rebuilding your own life again.